is the longest walk ever for a conference. Like I felt like I was like coming out on like a catwalk. I gotta get like my stomp going. It's a really crappy stomp. Anyway, hello everybody. Thank you for being here. This is super exciting and nerve-wracking for me. I kind of like just went into a cave 3 years ago, and this is my first time back on a stage ever. So I'm like really feeling like that rush of anxiety that comes from like having to do this like a first timer. I was like up until like 4 o'clock in the morning last night, like really like kind of ironing out my kind of not that great slides. And like, it's just really exciting. And so I'm excited to be here with all of you, just kind of enjoying like what is like one of our first conferences back in person in a while. So super fun. I've been doing all these like kind of like awkward like hey gestures all day. So I don't know, I'll learn to be human again eventually. So this talk is about UI testing. And so I think that we have a tooling problem that is like just vastly underestimated right now. And I think it impacts our applications, our organizations, but then also like the broader web in general. So today we're going to talk about some of those missing tooling, some of the tools that I like, and we're going to answer the question that I know that some Just Stan in here has been asking since the second that I took the stage. When is this idiot going to change this stupid slide? Not yet. So I love the web. I've been excited about it ever since I was a kid. Like it's just always enamored me, this idea that we have this thing that's kind of like its own being. And if we do things right, the things that we build actually have the opportunity to kind of like transcend us, transcend time. It's like really kind of like a wild place. And I love great software. And unfortunately, I've been really disappointed with how janky things have become as the web has started to dominate more native platforms, like React Native or Electron. It's going everywhere, and it kind of sucks. Honestly, like as someone who enjoys software and pays a lot of money for software, like I'm tired of beta testing software that I pay for in everyone's apps here. So selfishly, I just want the web to get better. I want the applications that we build to get better. I want us to communicate better about building those applications and just honestly live happier lives, like live in that promise of like things just kind of like working for us instead of fighting our automations, having our automations work for us and do what we're supposed to do. Okay, just friend, this is your moment. I'm finally advancing this slide. Okay, so who TF is this? This is the part of the talk where I'm supposed to like introduce myself and try to convince you in like a brief second that what I'm supposed to say is worth your time, even though you have absolutely no idea who I am. So I'm going to tell you a handful of things about me, and maybe they'll make a difference, but I'm going to try to just go for like honesty vibes so you can kind of like trust that I'm not trying to pull one over on you. So first and foremost, hi, I'm Chan. Chantastic, Michael, whatever you want to call me. I'm like, my friends called me Spaz in high school, so I'll probably like have some like reticular activation like thing happen to that if you call me Spaz. And then I have accidentally peed myself as an adult, like unintentionally. I've done it intentionally too. That's kind of a different story, but accidentally it has happened. I used to run a show called React Podcast, and talked with a handful of people that are just astronauts, just like the absolute like best in our industry, and I absolutely loved that. If you were listening to my voice and you were thinking like, that guy sounds familiar, but he sounds like a drunk version of the person who runs React Podcast, yes, this is my 1X speaking voice. You're getting the 1X experience here. But yeah, so I burned out. It was just like totally too much work, so I stopped doing that and then just kind of like just buried myself into a hole. And I kind of pivoted to being like the oldest guy who was logging about 40 hours a week on Destiny 2. That was kind of like my new shtick in life. But it wasn't like all gone to waste like over the last handful of years. Like I was able to work with the React working group to help communicate React 18 to the community at large. And it was like super fun work. And I also started like my favorite space on the internet. So if you're looking for like a really good space on the internet full of creative, curious and kind developers, like I really recommend that you like join us. Some of my favorite people I've met over the last 2 years. And then I guess some details that might be beneficial to this talk is that I've spent 12 years in developer productivity, design systems, and front-end architecture. So that's where this talk is coming from. And finally, I read at a third grade reading level, so if there's any awkward pauses, that's me reading my speaker notes. And just this last fall, I joined Chromatic and am really working to improve the UX of the web, and that's what this talk is about. So we're talking about the testing trophy. Who knows about the testing trophy? Okay, quite a few. Kent, you've done a great job. I don't know if you're here right now, but bravo. So let's take a look at the testing trophy. This is the testing trophy. This is something that was codified by Kent C. Dodds, which was generated from a tweet by Guillermo Rauch, which was using a kind of text meme format that was used to summarize Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma, which is a really good book if you are an omnivore. But it resulted in this really cool testing integration strategy, or testing strategy for front-end developers, or I guess developers at large. And so today we're going to kick this on its side and talk about kind of the continuum of tools that are involved in actually exercising this strategy. Okay, so it kind of breaks down into these 4 groups, right? We have static, unit, integration, end-to-end. And as a distribution, they kind of break down something like this. Every app is a little bit different, right? And then if we kind of overlay some of the most popular tools today doing this work, we have on the static side, we have TypeScript. Then on the end-to-end side, we have Cypress. And in the middle, we have Jest. And it's kind of interestingly covering these 2 spots, unit tests and integration tests. Now, in order to actually optimize it for integration tests, we're also utilizing JS DOM and testing library. Another shout out to Kent. How is that guy everywhere? I don't understand. Okay, so what we're going to focus on today is this little section in the middle where we see a lot of tools already. And we're going to look at it because this is the biggest part. This is theoretically where we're supposed to be writing the majority of our tests. If we write a test at all, we should probably figure out how to make an integration test first. But every time I see this a distribution like this, where we have this really big graph, I wonder if there's any chance that this is just 2 kids in a trench coat. If there's not something else that we're missing, if there's an abstraction or a thought that we haven't kind of figured out just yet and is waiting for us to find it. And I think that second kid, the one hiding in the bottom half of the trench coat, is visual testing, which we're talking about today. Now, this we're going to kind of refer to quite a bit throughout the course of this talk, and I'm going to refer to it as the UI testing continuum. We're going to place different things on this graph and kind of talk about how it fits into our strategy as application developers, specifically front-end engineers. So let's talk about the UI multiverse. Okay, or the 10-ish dimensions of web UI. Or if I'm feeling really cheeky, 35,000 perfect states. So every UI starts out in this ideal state. And maybe you're a mobile first person, you're really dogmatic about it. And so you start mobile first. And so in your mind, you think about the UI that you want to build, and it starts here, this first dimension of just a perfect UI state, everything in place. It's beautiful. Everybody loves it. You're a hero. But then it quickly, we remember, okay, there's going to be some failures, there's going to be some, errors, people are going to have to load that page. And so we get a second dimension, which is these 3 states. But it doesn't stop there, because each of these states can also have variations of that state. We could have just a spinner, but we could have many skeletons that apply to various content, various views on our page. A 404, we might direct a user differently than a 500 and differently than just a generic error message. Now that gets further complicated. The universe expands quite a bit more when we introduce this next one, which is viewports, right? And so, I don't know, by my estimation, I think the apps that I worked on had typically about 6 viewports. I think that can go up or down depending on the complexity of your app. But today we're just gonna focus on these 5 or 4 right now, just because that's what I could fit on this screen. Now we have browser engines. This is an additional dimension that comes into play, where we have all of those kind of multiplied by the possibility of any one of the browser engines trying to ruin our day. And if you've been in this field for a really long time, you've had to work with various versions of Internet Explorer, and your life was ruined constantly. Now, we also have, if we're like being just exceptionally diligent, we also need to consider the user abilities. Are they using this like mobily with their hands or with some assistive device? Are they able to view this content, or are they hearing it via a screen reader? Now, this one, I'm gonna do like a 0 on this one because like I don't have any solutions that I can offer you in the automated device capabilities space yet, but I don't know, hopefully someone will figure that out. It sounds like the folks at Replay are doing some really cool stuff, so check out their booth. Wink. Okay, and then, so then we have this authorization and logic. Now I mix these together because I want to keep it simple, and honestly at this point, I don't even know how I would add more dimensions to this slide. We would have to like have some like space where we could interpret a 4th dimension. But like authorization, usually you have like at least 2 user types, like a basic user and then like an admin user, someone who has, you know, all the rights. But then also you can imagine like how crazy this gets with like combinatorial logic, right? Where if you have 2 states that interact with each other on a view, well, now that just kind of like spits things out further. So we're going to keep that simple. And then we have localization. So now we take the whole thing and we just double it. So if you have to work with right to left, or if you have the privilege of being able to work with right to left, you've carried to that point in your like scale, like, wow, like this is super exciting. But also it's a huge part of this like component UI multiverse, right? Things that you have to keep in your mind all the time. And then like to just make it all worse, now you have like the challenges of organization. So anyone who works in like design systems or component libraries, you absolutely know that the worst part of that job is not the universe that you've created, but all the pressures that come with it as it starts to get adopted intentionally and both accidentally by different people across the company. And then maybe those people even have the audacity to take in some framework autonomy of their own and introduce various frameworks that you didn't plan for. So I want to talk about my personal problem, and I want to get into numbers really quick. So we'll try to fast forward this because, I mean, time is already flying. So let's see. So I want to talk about my problem because I know that all of you have different problems, and we all have different problems. And so these numbers aren't going to match to exactly, but I want to just show you like how quickly this balloons. Okay, so we have one view, a single view, multiplied by 6 viewports, 3 browser engines. It was 4, so glad that it's just 3 now, 3 device capabilities, and then 4 user abilities. Okay, we go through, that's 216 perfect states, okay? Now, as we start to scale our company, we have, let's just say even 2 authorization types. We have, I'm gonna cut out RTL because I haven't had the privilege of having to solve that problem. And then like 2 UI frameworks, okay? So that balloons that to 864 perfect states that any one view is going to have to consider. But we're not done yet. Now we have style. Look, we haven't even talked about like actually styling this thing. Themes are really important over the last 2 years, and then contrast modes are equally important. So you have 2 themes and you have 2 contrast modes. And then in my particular problem, I was doing this across 10 applications that were uniquely branded. So that brings us to 34,560 possible ideal states per view. Like that is ridiculous. And I bring it up because I feel like that is the tension that as UI engineers, we end up feeling the weight of all the time. And there's just this thing in the back of our head where we know it's a way freaking bigger problem than we give it credit for. And I think we survive by, oh shoot, actually there's one more thing I wanted to say. So there's this, so as I was making these slides, I was thinking about this blog that I remembered, and someone had built kind of like a perfect button in Figma. And this is like the end result. And for like the handful of options they had just for this button, 1,134 variants inside of Figma. Anyway, so we survive by just not thinking about it, honestly. I think we survive and I think the problem is test creation. So if we look at the suitability kind of along this UI testing continuum again, so we have static, unit, integration, visual, which is part of integration, and then end-to-end. So I think static is great for interfaces. Units are good for testing implementation. On this side, end-to-end tests are really good for testing flows. And then we have this period this spot in the middle that's really about coordination, multiple units working together. Integration is for non-visual stuff, and then this is the stupidest slide that I've made. Visual is for visual stuff. So you're welcome. If you want a picture, now's the time to like really make fun of me. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Now, when we break this down by role, I think this is really interesting. We have engineers on one side, and then we have like QA on the other side, kind of like from a product side and then an engineering side. But then there's this kind of like gap in the middle, right? And that gap is full of, and there's hope that like maybe those edges from the other side will kind of like shrink in, and like the QA team will like take care of it, or like our PM will be really diligent and like test the things that we don't really care to test. And we just like, it looks good to me, works on my machine. Yeah, I swear I tested it in browser stack. Now, if I'm really being honest about this, I've had to try to figure out like, how can we make this better? How can we get people to commit a single test? And I think that one of the challenges is that we work in this very like declarative kind of space. We're working in the browser, we're doing all this stuff visually, and then we're required to kind of like go back and then write all these very like weird imperative tests to like put this thing in a certain state and then like test it and then make sure that it matches our expectations, but all in a text-based scenario. And it's like very odd. And like our tools don't really do a lot of justice for us here. Like Jest has snapshots, and I will admit those are very good for any type of data that you can serialize, but absolutely useless for like DOM. Like, why do I care about the DOM that's going to be sent to the browser? Like, it's not useful information to me, and I just like accept until like it literally is just a problem. It's standing in my way. Now, on the Cypress side, like these tests are excruciating, and they're slow to write. I don't want to do it. Nobody wants to do it. So like it's never going to happen. Like the idea that we're going to test 34,500 possible combinations is just not going to happen in Cypress. So how do we produce tests in this visual integration gap? And I think the answer has to be automatically. That's what we're going to talk about. So I want to talk about declarative UI testing using Storybook, Chromatic, and CI. Okay, and then in addition to this, I really want to thank my friend Varun, who had the foresight to share with me his slides that have some demonstrations, knowing that the grand ideas that I had for like making videos that I inserted into this talk were like going to dissipate at 2 o'clock in the morning last night. So thank you, Varun. I love you. You're great. Okay, so let's talk about Storybook. Storybook is really interesting. In the words of Brad Frost, who did Atomic Design, it is a front-end workshop environment. And so that means a couple things. It means that it's isolated from your full stack, and it's dedicated to the task of making UI. And that'll come in really handy as we kind of like talk through this. Now, one thing that we've wanted to kind of bring to Storybook is kind of introduce this intermediate kind of tool. It's not full stack, but then it's not like a design tool either. But we wanted to borrow some of the language because it's so closely tied to design, borrow language from tools like Figma. And tools like Figma and design tools in general have this like really like good idea of sticker sheets for like representing components and variations. Like it's very, very well thought through. And so we wanted to create a space where you could have all of your components in a similar way and be able to search through them, work through them, and then just kind of like battle test them in isolation of your full stack. Now, there's a handful of things when you have a dedicated environment like this too that you can actually like bring up to the surface. And so this is actually really cool, is that like who still in 2022, when they're trying to like test mobile breakpoints and like be honest, this is my legitimate hand like going up, still just like grabs the corner of their screen and then just like tries to find that 1 pixel breakpoint. Okay, a lot of you are truth tellers. The rest of you are liars. Thank you to the honest ones. Right? So it's like, it's stupid. And the thing is, we have some really cool tools out there, third-party tools that we can use. But the thing is, like, they don't actually, like, actually getting everyone a license on our team and syncing them well. And then, like, that's just our team. Like, once it actually goes out to the organization, there's no way to be able to communicate, like, this is how you do all this stuff. So in Storybook, we can bring some of those, like, tools to the forefront. We can program in all of our breakpoints and then just kind of like toggle through those. If you're a Storybook user already, you just hit V a couple times. You'll automatically go to whatever viewport you're looking for. We have tools like Measure. Spacing is critically important these days in your applications, and so with a tool like Measure, we can just kind of like, instead of going into the dev tools, opening up the right pane, we just like have it. We just hover over the thing that we want to look at, and like, there we go. Hey friend, I appreciate you nodding right there. I love you. So we have things like that. We're bringing these tools into the forefront. We can check the outline. And then one of my absolute favorite things that we have is accessibility testing. So using Axe requires that it's a fantastic tool. And so we have to like install it into our browser tools and then like ensure that everyone has it installed and like knows how to use it and all that kind of stuff. We can bring that into Storybook and have all that information represented consistently for your whole organization to be able to share and see together. Now that's pretty cool, and then we can also like really get rid of the whole like console log WAT thing just to make sure that our like event handlers work by writing our stories and passing these in and saying that yes, in fact, they do work. And then for those who are using a typed language like like TypeScript or using prop types to document the interfaces of their components, we also have this ability to actually just kind of infer this interface for you. Wow, I am really going over. I apologize to everyone. I thought I was going to be under. This is how things go. And then once we have that information, we can go a step further and actually produce a UI playground that you can use to just modify, like interact with this component without having to touch it in code, which is absolutely stellar. I had the privilege of talking with a friend of mine at Shopify and has this really interesting idea of cross-functional literacy. And they said interactive story controls improve our team's cross-functional literacy and communication around React. And they have this goal of like a designer should be a designer, a PM should be a PM, and a developer should be a developer. You don't need to be like multiple things. You don't need to wear multiple hats. But we need to have a similar language where we can talk with one another and not just assume that the other person is speaking our language. So where does Chromatic come in? Now, Storybook is really cool because it solves a lot of organizational things, but we haven't actually arrived at visual testing, like kind of the promised land of getting automated visual tests yet. And so this is where Chromatic comes in. Chromatic is a service that will take your Storybook and everything that you have a story for, do a visual snapshot and diff of, and integrate that into CI. And then for people who love just snapshots on DOM elements, when we detect a visual change, then we will show you that visual, that DOM change. So pretty cool, a little bit of everything for everyone. And then we also have our building in capabilities to interaction test in browsers via the service. So if you have something where you want to like go on and like click a button and that like actually registers a modal, like, whoa, cool, you can actually do that now and test it inside of the browsers that you want to test it in. And it's all CI integrated. So if you use GitHub or GitLab or any of them, you can actually just kind of roll this into your development process and have these checks that say like, hey, everything looks good. You don't have to worry about it. The multiverse is contained. Or like, hey, you screwed something up and there's an alligator Loki. So Brad Frost says Brad Frost wrote Atomic Design and talks a lot from the perspective of front-end engineering. And I really love this. This is like, testing has historically been really rough for us because it's been like, picture in your mind's eye a modal and imagine clicking on a button that opens that modal. And goes on to talk about how difficult it is to like test these things without having the benefit of a like visual front-end workshop environment. And concludes by saying like, by writing a story, you get documentation for the component, tests for the component, and a playground for the component, all for free. Now, we don't have a ton of time. We have no time, but But I just wanted to shout out some friends of ours at Redwood. I think that they are doing some of the coolest integration work in this space that I've seen yet. They have some incredible abstractions. They borrow some generator concepts from Rails, and it's been an absolute joy to see how they're pushing visual testing to the forefront and specifically making it automatic with tools like Prisma, validating the schema for those tests, and MSW to mock those tests. Really crazy stuff. Crazy in the best way. So, what does that all mean? Why am I giving this talk to you? Okay, so here today, all of us, I believe that we are similarly cursed in that we love the web. Like, it's a real problem. Talked to my psychiatrist about it quite a bit, actually. We believe in this promise of everything, everywhere, all at once, for all time, and accessible to all. And I think that is maybe the coolest thing about the web, is that when we do it right, it is this really, truly beautiful, virtuous thing that is just wonderful to behold. And I know for all its faults, it really, no other platform makes that promise. And that's what excites me about the web. But also, if I'm being really honest, I think that there's something broken inside of me that likes to work on something that can never be perfected, something that I can never perceive, something that, I'm just the god of this kind of falsely constructed universe that's super important to me, and then it kind of fights back a little bit. I'm like, ooh, you're so cool. But I believe that I can fix it and contain it. But when things do start to kind of get outside of my reach, and the multiverse kind of expands a little bit past me, things get a little bit sad, and every feature that I push comes back with 20 or 30 UI user reported bugs, and that sucks, or I can't get a feature through because we have so many criteria, and all I want to do is get this thing over the line. I've been spending so much time on it, and then there's just more and more and more to do, things that I just kind of had left my mind, but I knew in the back of my head were always there. And then I start saying no instead of yes, and I stopped being excited about the things that are possibilities and are to come, and new technologies and ways that we could kind of find new solutions to problems. And my teams start languishing, and the products start dying, and it's just this really depressing cycle. And I don't want to just get a new job because I can't do the one that I have. Inevitably, it all culminates in me being this villain who's no, we can't do that because this was and the other thing, and now we're just in that point where we sit back and we just kind of enjoy the fact that there's nothing that we can do anymore. But we love the web, and I want it to be great, and I want my apps to be great, and I want your apps to be great, and especially if any of you work at my mortgage company, you have a lot of freaking work to do for this app to be great, but I believe in you. We've got a lot of work to do. And at this point, front-end engineering, I feel has had this problem where we just haven't utilized, we haven't found our own voice. We haven't found the tools that actually allow us to capture all of the beautiful complexity that exists in the applications that we're building and actually enjoy the process. Have something that's actually able to defend and contain all of the decisions that have been made up to this point for us, a second brain that knows how all of this stuff works. So, visual testing. I think there's a whole category of browser-based integration testing that we barely scratched the surface of, and I really hope that you will kind of join us in this journey of figuring out what the edges of this thing are. And I really love that it's really tightly integrated with some of the tools that we're already familiar with, so that we can kind of go back and forth and find this incremental adoption for bringing these patterns to our applications. And honestly, I don't think that this was possible before components. I can't think of a way that you were able to test the visual parts of your application without running the full stack before components. Tom Preston-Werner, who started Redwood and is just acclaimed developer at GitHub, semantic versioning and all that stuff, says that one of his favorite things about Redwood and the Storybook integration is that now he doesn't have to spend any time twiddling a database or toggling on network effects or creating latency to see what types of what his app state looks like in the various like asynchronous states. It's just all there all the time, ready for him to make changes as he needs. So Sandy Wentz, one of my hero developers, says, tester the wall at your back. And I hope that if there's one thing that you take away from this talk is that there are tools out there that you can use to defend, contain, and tame this component multiverse. So tame your UI multiverse, and I look forward to building a better web with you and improving the UX of the web. So that's it. That's it for me. Thanks for listening to me. I'm Chantastic. You can find me here.